Give me some minutes and we'll begin. I just need to check if everything is working fine or no. Give me some minutes and we'll begin. I just need to check if everything is working fine or no. Give me some minutes and we'll begin. I just need to check if everything is working fine. ठीक है, चीज़ें सही हैं तो हम आगे बढ़ सकते हैं. वॉइस भी ठीक है आई गेस. लाइव वीडियो को देख के मैं बाल सही कर रहा हूँ. ओके ओके, लेट्स जस्ट कीप इट लाइक दैट. ओके देखो, जो टाइटल है आपके सामने, इससे पहले हमने अष्टवक्र महागीता बाई ओशो ऑलरेडी कवर कर ली है. और यहाँ पे हम कवर करने वाले हैं मैन्स सर्च फॉर मीनिंग बाय विक्टर फ्रैंकल. विक्टर ई फ्रैंकल है इनका पूरा नाम, और यहाँ पे विक्टर ई विजिबल है, फ्रैंकल भी है बेसिकली, ये आप देख पा रहे हो. तो Man's Search for Meaning is the name of the book. Before this, I have already covered the book Ashtavakra Mahagita by Osho. I have covered the first volume of it, which is around 200 pages, so I have already covered it. And it gave me a perspective about life, it gave me an understanding about life in a different manner. So basically, there I have learned to see the things as a witness. Witness as in you are thinking your own emotions as a witness too. You are not a doer. That was the whole point of that book, and you are a witness. So do things, but keep this thing in your mind that you are a witness. You are not a doer. Okay, and I'm a firm believer of it. Now moving forward, I want another perspective about life and more optimism and a fresher perspective. So that's why I came across this book, which is Men's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl, and it talks about logotherapy, it talks about optimism about life and other things around the same. तो उन चीज़ों के बारे में ही बात करती है. सो आई एम ट्राइंग टू कवर दोज थिंग्स अप. ये है विक्टर ई फ्रैंकल, जिन्होंने होलोकॉस्ट सर्वाइव किया था. इसके बारे में भी हम बात करेंगे. और उसी टाइम पे जैसे नेगेटिव जब टाइम थे, उन्होंने कैसे सर्वाइव किया और कैसे उनकी अंडरस्टैंडिंग डेवलप हुई, कैसे वो लाइफ के बारे में एक नया पर्सपेक्टिव दे पाए, वो हम इस बुक में कवर करेंगे. ओके, सो दैट इज़ द बिगिनिंग ऑफ द बुक. Victor E. Frankl, To the Memory of Mother. All right, these are the contents. Okay, experiences in a concentration camp, then logotherapy in a nutshell. Postscript, the case of a tragic optimism. ये अपने आप में ऑक्सीमोरोन की तरह लाइक साउंड कर सकता है, ऑप्टिमिज्म एंड ट्रैजिक, ये कैसे हो सकता है साथ में. तो लेकिन कुछ पर्सपेक्टिव यहाँ से भी हमें नया मिलेगा. स्टार्ट करते हैं. सो दिस इज़ द फॉरवर्ड. ऑलराइट, so Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning is one of the great books of our time. Typically, if a book has one passage, one idea with the power to change a person's life, that alone justifies reading it, rereading it, and finding room for it in it on one's selves. This book has several such passages. It is first of all a book about survival. Like so many German and Eastern European Jews who thought themselves secure in the 1930s, Frankl was cast into the Nazi network of concentration and extermination, extermination camps. Miraculously, he survived in the biblical phrase, a brand plucked from the fire. But his account in this book is less about his travels, what he suffered and lost, than it is about the sources of his strength to survive. And that's what I am seeking as of now. Several times in the course of the book, Frankl approvingly quotes the word of Nietzsche: he who has why to live for can bear almost anyhow. I want to read it again. He who has a why to live for can bear almost anyhow. So that means if a person has a meaning about which he wants to live, then he can achieve everything in his life, anything in his life. So that's what the author is trying to convey over here. And these are the words of Nietzsche. He described poignantly those prisoners who gave up on life, who had lost all hopes for a future and very inevitably the first to die. They died less from lack of food and medicine than from lack of hope, lack of something to live for. By contrast, Frankel kept himself alive and kept hope alive by summoning up thoughts of his wife, all right, and the prospect of seeing her again. And by dreaming at one point of lecturing after the war about the psychological lessons to be learned from the Auschwitz experience, clearly many prisoners who desperately wanted to live did die, some from disease, some in the crematoria. But Frankel's concern is less with the question of why most men died than it is with the question of why anyone at all survived. Terrible is as it was, his experience in Auschwitz reinforced what was already one of his key ideas. Life is not primarily a quest for pleasure, as Freud believed, or a quest for power, as Adler taught, but a quest for meaning. Now, this is somehow the summary or the whole meaning of this particular book. Life is not primarily a quest for pleasure, as Freud believed, or quest for power, as Alfred Adler thought, but a quest for meaning. The greatest task for any person is to find meaning in his or her life. Frankl saw three possible sources for meaning: in work, doing something significant; in love, caring for another person; and in courage during difficult times. Suffering in and of itself is meaningless. We give our suffering meaning by the way in which we respond to it. At one point, Frankel writes that a person may remain brave, dignified, and unselfish, or in the bitter fight for self preservation, he may forget his human dignity and become no more than an animal. He concedes that only a few prisoners of the Nazis were able to do the former. But even one such example is sufficient proof that man's inner strength may raise him above his outward fate. Finally, Frankel's most enduring insight, one that I have called on often in my own life and is countless counseling situations: forces beyond your control can take away everything you possess except one thing: your freedom to choose how will you respond to the situation. ओके, सो आउटर जो कंडीशंस हैं वो आपसे सब कुछ छीन सकती हैं एक चीज़ के अलावा, और वो चीज़ क्या है कि आप उन सिचुएशन के अगेंस्ट कैसे एक्ट कर रहे हो, कैसे रिस्पॉन्ड कर रहे हो। एडवर्स कंडीशन चाहे कितनी भी हो, आप कैसे एक्ट कर रहे हो वो इंपॉर्टेंट होता है। अलग अलग पर्सन अलग अलग तरीके से आप बोल सकते हो कि रिस्पॉन्ड करते हैं। यू कैनॉट कंट्रोल वट हैपन्स टू यू इन लाइफ, बट यू कैन ऑलवेज कंट्रोल वट यू विल फील and do about what happens to you. Now, this is again important. You cannot control what happens to you in life, but you can always control what you will feel and do about what happens to you. Okay, let's see. Let me highlight that. There is a scene in Arthur Miller's play Incident at Wiki in which an upper middle class professional man appears before the Nazi authority that has occupied his town and shows his credentials, his university degrees, his letters of reference from prominent citizens, and so on. The Nazi asks him, "Is that everything you have?" The man nods. The Nazi throws it all in the waste basket and tells him, "Good, now you have nothing." The man, whose self esteem had always depended on the respect of others, is emotionally destroyed. Frankel would have argued that we are never left with nothing as long as we retain the freedom to choose how we will respond, and that is very important. We have this freedom always, that how we will respond. My own congregational experience has shown me the truth of Frankel's insight. I have known successful businessmen who, upon retirement, lost all zest for life. Their work had given their lives meaning. Often it was the only thing that had given their lives meaning. And without it, they spent day after day sitting at home, depressed, without nothing to do. I have known people who rose to the challenge of enduring the most terrible afflictions and situation as long as they believed there was a point to their suffering. Whether it was a family milestone they wanted to live long enough to share, or the prospect of doctors finding a cure by studying their illness. यहाँ पे मेरे को जाकिर खान की भी एक बात याद आ रही है। जाकिर खान ने भी एक बार एक पॉडकास्ट में बोला था कि आपके जो पेरेंट्स हैं, जो आपके माता पिता हैं, वो तब बूढ़े नहीं हो जाते जब, मतलब एज से वो बूढ़े नहीं होते, वो तब एक्चुअल में बूढ़े हो जाते हैं जब उनके पास करने के लिए कुछ नहीं होता है, राइट। तो उनको बिजी रखो वाले सेंस में वो चीज़ें बता रहे थे। एंड नाउ आई कैन अंडरस्टैंड दैट। देखो, किसी ने अगर अपनी लाइफ एक पर्टिकुलर वे में जी है रिटायरमेंट के बाद, तभी तो बोलता है ना कि रिटायरमेंट के बाद आदमी अलग ही बिहेव करने लग जाता है, क्योंकि उसका जो मीनिंग था वो उसके वर्क के अराउंड घूमता था, और अब वो वर्क से ही इज़ आउट। सो so many people take it in a positive manner, but so many people feel like the goal of their life is already done. Now that's one way of looking at things, and that's what author is also saying. Having a why to live for enabled them to bear the how. अगर किसी को ट्रू मीनिंग पता है कि क्यों वो जीना चाहता है, तो कैसे वो जिएगा वो अपने आप फिगर आउट कर लेगा ये चीज़ें, ऐसा। एंड माई ओन एक्सपीरियंस echoes Frankel's in another way. Just as the ideas in my book, when bad things happen to good people, gain power and credibility because they were offered in the context of my struggle to understand the illness and death of our son. Frankel's doctrine of logotherapy, curing the soul by leading it to find meaning in life, gains credibility against the background of his anguish in Auschwitz. The last half of the book without the first would be far less effective. I find it significant that the forward to the book 1962 edition of Men's Search for Meaning was written by a prominent psychologist, Dr. Gordon Alport, and the forward to this new edition is written by clergymen. We have come to recognize that this is a profoundly religious book. It insists that life is meaningful and that we must learn to see life as meaningful despite our circumstances. It emphasizes that there is an ultimate purpose to life, and in its original version, before a postscript was added, it concluded with one of the most religious sentences written in the 20th century. We have come to know man as he really is. After all, man is that being who invented the gas chambers of Auschwitz. However, he is also that being who entered those gas chambers upright with the Lord's Prayer or the Serma Israel on his lips. Harold S. Kushner. Alright. Harold S. Kushner is a Rabbi Emeritus at Temple Israel in Natick, Massachusetts, and the author of several best-selling books, including When Bad Things Happen to Good People, Living a Life That Matters, and When All You Have Ever Wanted Isn't Enough. So these are the names of the book written by Harold S. Kushner. Preface to the 1992 edition. This book has now lived to see nearly 100 printings in English, in addition to having been published in 21 other languages, and the English editions alone have sold more than 3 million copies. Now, this is just to give you a perspective and the understanding about life in general. There are the dry facts. These are the dry facts, and they may well be the reason why reporters of American newspapers and particularly of American TV stations more often. Why it is like. Give me 1 second, okay? These are the dry facts, and they may well be the reason why reporters of American newspapers and particularly of American TV stations more often than not start their interviews after listening these facts by exclaiming, "Dr. Frankel, your books has become a true bestseller. How do you feel about such a success?" Whereupon I react by reporting that in the first place I do not at all see in the bestseller status of my book as an achievement and accomplishment on my part. but rather an expression of the misery of our time. If hundreds of thousands of people reach out for a book whose very little, very title promises to deal with the question of meaning to life, it must be a question that burns under their fingernails. To be sure, something else may have contributed to the impact of the book. Its second theoretical part, logotherapy in a nutshell, boils down as it were to the lesson one may distill from the first part, the autobiographical account, experiences in a concentration camp. Whereas part 1 serves as the existential validation of my theories, thus both parts mutually support their credibility. I had none of this in mind when I wrote the book in 1945, and I did so within 9 successive days and with a firm determination that the book should be published anonymously. In fact, the first printing of the original German version does not show my name on the cover. Though at the last moment, just before the book's initial publication, I did finally give in to my friends who had urged me to let it be published with my name, at least on the title page. At first, however, it had been written with the absolute conviction that, as an anonymous opus, it could never earn its author literary fame. I had wanted simply to convey to the reader by way of a concrete example that life holds a potential meaning under any conditions, even the most miserable ones. And I thought that if the point were demonstrated in a situation as extreme as that in a concentration camp, my book might gain a hearing. I therefore felt responsible for writing down what I had gone through, for I thought it might be helpful to people who are prone to despair. And so it is both strange and remarkable to me that among some dozens of books I have authored, precisely this one, which I had intended to be published anonymously so that it could never build up any reputation on the part of the author, did become a success. Again and again, I therefore admonish my students both in Europe and America, don't aim at success. The more you aim at it and make it a target, the more you are going to miss it. That's my philosophy as well. Like, I want to do the things that I really want to do, and I want money to come as a byproduct of it. Nowadays, people, either they are working in a corporate sector or in government jobs, their first priority is, or their first preference is money, which is completely understandable in their part. I understand what is the reason why they are doing it, and I can completely understand their perspective as well, but that is something I don't resonate myself with. So they are doing it precisely for money. They hate to do, hate to go to their working place on a daily basis, and they hate to work their 9 to 5 job, and then at the end of the month when they get salary, or in the beginning of the next month when they receive their salary, they somehow become fine with it, because with that money they are able to afford certain things. But once they will realize that they are keep on doing the same thing for 40 to 60 years, and the life has passed in front of them in doing the things that they hate, then maybe they'll have this regret, and I don't want that for myself. That's why I'm trying to find out certain things that I like to do, and I want to get money out of it, because I know money is very important for surviving. I have a very clear idea about it, but at the same time I want money to be a byproduct of what I want to do. And I've seen people getting success when they have similar mindset, when they really like, I've seen people getting successful in their life when they are actually doing what they want to do. I've never seen person who got a lot of success even though they have no interest in that particular field. That's a rare case. I have never seen a single case where the person is not interested in his or her work and he got, tremendous success in that. That's not the case. People always succeed when they really love their work. And on this other side, people who are doing the jobs just for the sake of money, they may get a lot of money of because of it. They may be able to, get the materialistic things out of it, but some point in their heart will always crave for doing the things that they really want to do. And I don't want to advocate those people, because it's their personal choice, it's their life. But for myself at least, I want to do the certain things in which I'm good at, the things that I want to do, and I want to get money out of it as a byproduct. Alright, so let's move forward. That's why I want to find a meaning of life, and don't feel you are lacking behind just by comparing comparing with people who are doing things in the corporate world or in the government jobs, because maybe in social media and other platforms they are showing their life is perfect, but deep down there is this emptiness, and that is worst. I have worked in a corporate field, in a corporate sector for 3 years, and at the end of the 3 year I had nothing except the money they gave me and some experience obviously. Basically it was not something that gave me fulfillment. So yeah, that's there. I want to do things which has value, at least in my life, which will make me feel good about myself, right? That's the only thing that I'm asking for. And I want it to make money for me. Like, I want money to come as byproduct, because if I'll be passionate about certain things, I'll put my efforts into it, and money will follow. But if you'll follow money, the money will ultimately move far and far and far from you. And that's what the author is also trying to say, that he always say these things to his students in Europe and America, that don't aim at success. The more you aim at it and make it a target, the more you are going to miss it. For success, like happiness, cannot be pursued, it must ensue, and it only does so as the unintended side effects of one's dedication to a cause greater than oneself, or as the byproduct product of one's surrender to a person other than oneself. That's why this channel is also all about expression for me. It's not about impression. I've seen the priority of people nowadays is just, copy some trend and become viral overnight. So they see that as a success. For me, that's not what success is. For me, this channel is all about my expression, not impressing people. If people are getting impressed by what I'm expressing, that is a whole different scenario, and I'll appreciate it highly. But I don't want to work for the impression, I want to work for the expression. If similar like-minded people, join me in this journey, then good. If people are not ready to join me in this journey, again, that's their choice, and everybody has their own right to live the life they want to live, or at least in the way they want to live. All right. Now, moving ahead, happiness must happen, and the same holds for success. You have to let it happen by not caring about it. I want. Now, this questions the very idea that we learn from our very childhood, right? Go for the success. Go every time for the success. Aim for the success. That's what we learn from our childhood, right? अगर आपको याद है, थ्री इडियट्स करके एक पिक्चर थी, उसमें ऐसा कुछ तो था कि सफलता झक मार के तुम्हारे पीछे आएगी। तो उसका क्रक्स मैं बता देता हूँ कि अगर तुम अपनी पसंद की चीज़ें करोगे तो सक्सेस तुम्हारा पीछा करेगी, ऐसा कुछ था उसमें, राइट? ये रैंचो की मेन फिलॉसफी थी उस पिक्चर में, राइट? सो हैप्पीनेस, यहाँ पे ऑथर भी सिमिलरली कुछ वैसे ही बात कर रहे हैं। हैप्पीनेस मस्ट हैपन एट द सेम होल्ड्स फॉर सक्सेस। You have to let it happen by not caring about it. So just be happy on doing what you are doing, right? मैंने देखा है लोग बोलते हैं कि हमने बहुत स्ट्रगल करा है, ये करा है, वो करा है, बट जिन्होंने एक्चुअल में अपने फील्ड में सक्सेस मिली है जिनको, ना, उन्होंने स्ट्रगल हो सकता है कि वर्ड के पर्सपेक्टिव से करा है, बट एट दी कोर अगर आप माइक्रोस्कोपिक स्कोपिक लेवल में देखोगे तो वो वही काम कर रहे थे जो वो करना चाहते थे। हाँ, उनको वैसा रिजल्ट थोड़ा लेट मिला। चाहे वो आप किसी भी फेमस पर्सन की बात कर लो, एलन मस्क की बात कर लो जब वो अपने स्टार्टिंग फेज में था, आप स्टीव जॉब्स की बात कर लो, आप मार्क जुकरबर्ग की बात कर लो, कैसे उन्होंने स्टार्ट किया, कैसी कैसी एडवर्सिटी में उन्होंने काम किया, पर उनको कभी वो एडवर्सिटी लगी ही नहीं, क्योंकि वो अपने काम में इतना इंडल्ज थे। सो देर इज़ दिस, I I don't know if I should share it or not, but there is this thing about Elon Musk, that in one of the interviews by his wife said Elon Musk asked her to come to the room and he will tell her about, rockets and all the things around the same. So her wives thought, okay, it is just a way by which Elon Musk is calling her to the room. Alright. She went inside the room, and throughout the time they spent together, Elon Musk was only talking about rockets and their interest and everything around the same. So he literally meant what he wanted to say. The, you know, The women thought he wanted to get her inside the room, but that was not the scenario. He was so passionate about his work, even though he was at an initial stage, he could see what he is aiming for. He was so passionate about his work that later on in his life he got great success around the same. Right? So that was the whole point. Do your thing, uh, find your calling and work on it. Ultimately, success will follow, and that's something that I firmly believe on. Happiness must happen, and the same holds for success. You have to let it happen by not caring about it. Don't care about happiness, don't care about success, care about what exactly you are doing, what is the task in the hand, what you want to do. I want you to listen to what your conscience commands you to do and go on to carry it out to the best of your knowledge. To the best of your knowledge. Again, don't wait for perfection. And I'm saying it from my own example as well. Like, I am the kind of person who, in the early stage of my life, always thought if I want to do something, I have to make a perfect scenario around it and then only I should work for it. But that's not the truth. You have to start somewhere so that over the period of time, along with the journey, you'll become better and better in it. And ultimately, you'll reach at a stage where which is closer to perfection, because perfection itself is a myth, I think. But yeah, there is always a scope of improvement. You have to start somewhere. To the best of your knowledge is something that you can do. So work in whatever field you want to work on, whatever your conscience allowed, whatever your conscience commands, and work on this field best of your knowledge. That is what matters. All right. Then you will live to see that in the long run, I say, in the long run, again, people are looking for momentary success nowadays, and that's not what this is all about. It is about the long run. Success will follow you precisely because you had forgotten to think about it. Think of it. The reader may ask me why I did not try to escape what was in the store for me after Hitler had occupied Austria. Let me answer by recalling the following story. Shortly before the United States entered World War II, I received an invitation to come to the American consulate in Vienna to pick up my immigration visa. My old parents were overjoyed because they expected that I would soon be allowed to leave Austria. I certainly hesitated. However, the question beset me: could I really afford to leave my parents alone to face their fate, to be sent sooner or later to a concentration camp or even to a so-called extermination camp? Where did my responsibility lie? Should I foster my brainchild, logotherapy, by immigrating to fertile soil where I could write my books? Or should I concentrate on my duties as a real child, the child of my parents, who had to do whatever he could to protect them? I pondered the problem this way and that, but could not arrive at a solution. This was the type of dilemma that made one wish for a hint from heaven, as the phrase goes. So basically, thinking of finishing the life. It was then that I noticed a piece of marble lying on a floor on a table at home. When I asked my father about it, he explained that he had found it on the site where the National Socialists had burned down the largest Viennese synagogues. He had taken the piece home because it was a part of the tablets on which the Ten Commandments were inscribed. One gilded Hebrew letter was engraved on the piece. My father explained that this letter stood for one of the commandments. Eagerly I asked, which one is it? He answered, honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land. At that moment, I decided to stay with my father and my mother upon the land and to let the American visa lapse. Viktor E. Frankl, Vienna, 1992. Now comes the first chapter of this book, Experiences in a Concentration Camp. Let me give you a preview about it. So, this is about a survivor of Holocaust. So, we know about Hitler, right? So, he made concentration camps and he wanted to just he was a person who is known as true racist. So he want his race to be the best in the world, and he wanted to kill every other race. And in his country there was another race which was predominantly lived over there, so he wanted to kill them to the extent that they won't survive the world only. So that's why he put every other race except his own race inside the concentration camp, And the major part of that race which had to go through concentration camp was a single one. I don't want to name it now, but yeah, that was the whole idea. Now, this person, Viktor E. Frankl, survived this Holocaust. How he survived it, and what are his experiences in a concentration camp? How he got the meaning of life from there. What is meaning of life? What is logotherapy? That's what we are going to cover in this book. Now, experiences in concentration camp. This book does not claim to be an account of facts and events, but of personal experiences, experiences which millions of prisoners have suffered time and again. It is the inside story of a concentration camp told by one of its survivors. This tale is not concerned with the great horrors which have already been described often enough, though less often believed, but with the multitude of small torments. In other words, it will try to answer this question: how was everyday life in a concentration camp reflected in the mind of the average prisoner? Most of the events described here did not take place in the large and famous camps, but in the small ones where most of the real extermination took place. The story is not about the suffering and deaths of great heroes and martyrs, nor is it about the prominent capos, prisoners who acted as trustees, having special privileges, or well known prisoners. Thus, it is not so much concerned with the sufferings of the mighty, but with the sacrifices, the crucifixion, and the deaths of the great army of unknown and unrecorded victims. It was these common prisoners. ये the army of unknown सुन के मेरे mind में वो आ रहा है Game of Thrones. Okay, let's move ahead. Army of unknown and unrecorded victims. It was these common prisoners who bore no distinguishing marks on their sleeves, whom the capos really despised. While these ordinary prisoners had little or nothing to eat, the capos were never hungry. In fact, many of the capos fared better in the camp than they had in their entire lives. See, this is another perspective. Often they were harder to the prisoners than were to the guards, and beat them more cruelly than the SS man did. These capos, of course, were chosen only for those prisoners whose characters promised to make them suitable for such procedures, and if they did not comply with what was expected of them, they were immediately demoted. They soon became much like the SS man and the camp wardens, and may be judged on a similar psychological basis. It is easy for the outsider to get the wrong conception of camp life, a conception mingled with the sentiment and pity. Little does he know of the hard fight for existence which raged among the prisoners. This was an relenting struggle for daily bread and for life itself, for one's own sake or for that of a good friend. Let us take the case of transport, which was officially announced to transfer a certain number of prisoners to another camp, but it was a fairly safe guess that its final destination would be the gas chambers. A selection of sick or feeble prisoners incapable of work would be sent to one of the big central camps, which were filled with gas chambers and crematoriums. The selection process was the signal for a free fight among all the prisoners, or of a group against group. All that mattered was that one's own name and that one's friend were crossed off the list of victims. Though everyone knew that for each man saved, another victim had to be found. Like in the market, for everywhere there is another seller, right? Alright. A definite number of prisoners had to go with each transport. It did not really matter which, since each of them was nothing but a number. On their admission to the camp, at least this was the method in Auschwitz, all their documents had been taken from them together with their other possessions. Each prisoner, therefore, had an opportunity to claim a fictitious name or profession, and for various reasons, many did this. The authorities were interested only in the captives' numbers. These numbers were often tattooed on their skin and also had to be sewn to a certain spot on the trousers, jackets, or coat. Any guard who wanted to make a charge against a prisoner just glanced at this number, and how we dreaded such glances. He never asked for his name. To return to the convoy about to depart, There was neither time nor desire to consider moral or ethical issues. Every man was controlled by one thought only: to keep himself alive for the family waiting for him at home, and to save his friends. With no hesitation, therefore, he would arrange for another prisoner, another number, to take his place to the transport. As I have already mentioned, the process of selecting capos was a negative one. Only the most brutal of the prisoners were chosen for this job, although there were some happy exceptions too. But apart from the selection of capos, which was undertaken by the SS, there was a sort of self selecting process going on the whole time among all of the prisoners. On the average, only those prisoners could keep alive who, after years of tracking from camp to camp, had lost all scrup, scruples in their fight for existence. They were prepared to use every means, honest and otherwise, every brutal force, theft and betrayal to their friend in order to save themselves. We who have come back by the aid of many lucky chances or miracles, whatever one may choose to call them, we know the best of us did not return. Many factual accounts about concentration camps was already on record. Here, facts will significantly only as far as they are part of a man's experiences. It is the exact nature of these experiences that the following essay will attempt to describe. For those who have been inmates in a camp, it will attempt to explain their experiences in the light of present day knowledge, and for those who have never been inside, it may help them to comprehend, and above all, to understand the experiences of that only too small percentage of prisoners who survived and who now find life very difficult. These former prisoners often say, "We dislike talking about our experiences. No explanations are needed for those who have been inside, and the others will understand neither how we felt then nor how we feel now." To attempt a methodical presentation of the subject in very difficult, as psychology requires a certain scientific detachment. Okay, but does a man who makes it his observation while he himself is a prisoner possess the necessary detachment? Such detachment is granted to the outsider, but he is too far removed to many to make any statements of real value. Only the man inside knows. His judgments may not be objective. His evaluation may be out of proportion. This is inevitable. An attempt must be made to avoid any personal bias, and that is the real difficulty of a book in of this kind. At times, it will be necessary to have the courage to tell of very intimate experiences. I had intended to write this book anonymously, using my prison number only. But when the manuscript was completed, I saw that an anonymous publication it would lose half its value, and that I must have the courage to state my convictions openly. I therefore refrained from deleting any of the passage, in spite of an intense dislike of exhibitionism. I still leave it to others to distill the contents of this book into dry theories. These might become a contribution to the psychology of a prison life, which was investigated after the First World War, and which acquainted us with the syndrome of barbed wire sickness. We are indebted to the Second World War for enriching our knowledge of the psychopathology of the masses. If I may quote a variation of the well known phrase and title of a book by Lebrun, for the war gave us the war of nerves and it gives us the concentration camps. As this story is about my experience as an ordinary prisoner, it is important that I mention, not without pride, that I was not employed as a psychiatrist in a camp or even as a doctor except for the last few weeks. A few of my colleagues were lucky enough to be employed in poorly heated first aid posts applying bandages made of scraps of newspaper waste papers. But I was number 119, 104, and most of the time digging I was number 119, 104, and most of the time I was digging and laying tracks for railway lines. At one time, my job was to dig a tunnel without help for a water main under a road. This feat did not go unrewarded. This feat did not go unrewarded. Just before Christmas 1994, I was presented with a gift of so called premium coupons. These were issued by the concentration construction firm to which we were practically sold as slaves. The firm paid the camp authorities a fixed price per day per prisoner. The coupons cost the firm 50 pfennigs each and could be exchanged for 6 cigarettes, often weeks later, although they sometimes lost their validity. I became the proud owner of a token worth 12 cigarettes. But more important, the cigarettes could be exchanged for 12 soups, and 12 soups were often a very real respite from starvation. Okay. The privilege of actually smoking cigarette was reserved for the capo, who had his assured quota of weekly coupons, or possibly a prisoner who worked as a foreman in a warehouse or a workshop and received a few cigarettes in exchange for doing dangerous jobs. The only exceptions to this were those who had lost the will to live and wanted to enjoy their last days. Thus, when we saw a comrade smoking his own cigarettes, we knew he had given up faith in his strength to carry on, and when lost, the will to live seldom returned. When one examines the vast amount of material which has been amassed as the result of many prisoners' observation and experiences, three phases of this inmate's mental reactions to camp life before apparent, the period following his admission, the period when he is well entrenched in camp routine, and the period following his release and liberation. The symptom that characterizes the first phase is shock. Under certain conditions, shock may happen precede the prisoner's formal admission to the camp. I shall give as an example the circumstances of my own admission. 1500 persons had been traveling by train for several days and nights. There were 80 people in each coach. All had to lie on top of their luggage, the few remnants of their personal possessions. The carriages were so full that only the top parts of the window were free to let in the grey of dawn. Everyone expected the train to head for some munitions factory in which we could employ it as forced labor. We did not know whether we were still in Silesia or already in Poland. The engine's whistle had an uncanny sound, like a cry for help sent out in commiseration for the unhappy load which it was destined to lead into perdition. Then the train shunted, obviously nearing a main station. Suddenly a cry broke from the ranks of the anxious passengers. There is a sign, Auschwitz. Everyone's heart missed a beat at that moment. Auschwitz, the very name stood for all that was horrible. Gas chambers, crematorium, cremat, crematoriums, massacres. Slowly, almost hesitatingly, the train moved on as if it wanted to spare its passengers the dreadful realization as long as possible. Auschwitz. With the progressive dawn, the outlines of an immense camp became visible. Long stretches of several rows of barbed wire fences, watchtowers, searchlights, and long columns of ragged human figures, grey in the greyness of dawn, trekking along the straight, desolate roads toward destination we did not know. There were isolated shouts and whistles of command. We did not know their meaning. My imagination led me to see gallows with people dangling on them. I was horrified, but this was just as well because step by step we had to become accustomed to a terrible and intense horror. Eventually, we moved into the station. The initial silence was interrupted by shouted commands. We were to hear those rough, shrill tones from then on, over and over again in all the camps. Their sound was almost like the last cry of a victim, and yet there was a difference. It had a grasping hoarseness, as if it came from the throat of a man who had to keep shouting like that, a man who was being murdered again and again. The carriage doors were flung open and a small detachment of prisoners stormed inside. They wore stripped uniforms, their hats were shaved, but they looked well fed. They spoke in every possible European tongue, and all with a certain amount of humor, which sounded grotesque under the circumstances. Like a drowning man clutching a straw, my inborn optimism, which has often controlled my feelings even in the most desperate situations, clung to this thought. These prisoners look quite well. They seem to be in good spirits and even laugh. Who knows? I might manage to share their favorable position. So the author being optimistic in this wrong, what I can say, this adverse condition as well. In psychiatry, there is a certain condition known as delusion of reprieve. The condemned man, immediately before his execution, gets the illusion that he might be reprieved at the very last minute. We too clung to threads of hope and believed to the last moment that it would not be so bad. Just the sight of the red cheeks and round faces of those prisoners was a great encouragement. Little did we know then that they formed a specially chosen elite who for years had been the receiving squad for new transport as they rolled into the station day after day. They took charge of the new arrivals and their luggage, including scarce items and smuggled jewelry. Auschwitz must have been a strange post in this Europe of the last years of the war. There must have been unique treasures of gold and silvers, platinum, and diamonds, not only in the huge storehouses but also in the hands of the SS. 1,500 captives were cooped up in a shed built to accommodate probably 200 at the most. We were cold and hungry, and there was not enough room for everyone to squat on the bare ground, let alone to lie down. One 5 ounce piece of bread was our only food in 4 days, yet I heard the senior prisoner in charge of the said bargain with one member of the receiving party about a tie-pin made of platinum and diamonds. Most of the profits would eventually be traded for liquor, snaps. I do not remember any more just how many thousands of marks were needed to purchase the quantity of snaps required for a gay evening. But I do know that those gay evening का मतलब यहाँ पे happy evenings है. But I do know that those long-term prisoners needed snaps. Under such condition, who could blame them for trying to dope themselves? There was another group of prisoners who got liquor supplied in almost unlimited quantities by the SS. These were the men who were employed in the gas chambers and crematoriums and who knew very well that one day they would be relieved by a new shift of men and that they would have to leave their enforced role of executioner and become victims themselves. Okay, just give me 1 second. Okay, all right. Nearly in everyone in our transport lived under the illusion that he would be reprieved, that everything would yet be well. We did not realize the meaning behind the scenes that was to follow presently. We were told to leave our luggage in the train and to fall into two lines, women on one side, men on the other, in order to file past a senior SS officer. Surprisingly enough, I had the courage to hide my haversack under my coat. My line filed past the officer, man by man. I realized that it would be dangerous if the officer spotted my bag. He would at least knock me down. I knew that from previous experiences. Instinctively, I straightened on approaching the officer so that he would not notice my heavy load. Then I was face to face with him. He was a tall man who looked slim and fit in the spotless uniform. What a contrast to us, who was untidy and grimy after our long journey. He had assumed an attitude of careless ease, supporting his right elbow with his left hand. His right hand was lifted, and with the forefinger of that hand, he pointed very leisurely to the right or the left. None of us had the slightest idea of the sinister meaning behind that little movement of a man's finger, pointing now to the right and now to the left, but far more frequently to the left. It was my turn. Somebody whispered to me that to be sent to the right side would mean work, the way to the left being for the sick and those incapable of work, who would be sent to a spatial camp. I just waited for things to take their course, the first of many such times to come. My haversack weighed me down a bit to the left, but I made an effort to walk upright. The assessment looked me over, appeared to hesitate. They then put both his hands on my shoulders. I tried very hard to look smart, and he returned my shoulders very slowly until I faced right, and I moved over to that side. The significance of the finger game was explained to us in the evening. It was the first selection, the first verdict made in our existence or non existence. For the great majority of our transport, about 90%, it meant death. Their sentence was carried out within the next few hours. Those who were sent to the left were marched from the station straight to the crematorium. This building, as I was told by someone who worked there, had the word bath written over its doors in several European languages. On entering, each prisoner was handed a piece of soap, and then, but mercifully, I do not need to describe the events which followed. Many accounts have been written about this horror. We who were so saved, the minority of our transport, found out the truth in the evening. I inquired from prisoners who had been there for some time where my colleague and friend P had been sent. Was he sent to the left side? Yes, I replied. Then you can see him there, I was told. Where? A hand pointed to the chimney a few hundred yards off, which was sending a column of flame up into the grey sky of Poland. It dissolved into a sinister cloud of smoke. That's where your friend is, floating up to heaven, was the answer. But I still do not understand until the truth was explained to me in plain words. But I am telling things out of that turn. From a psychological point of view, we had a long, long way in front of us from the break of that dawn at the station until our first night's rest at the camp. Escorted by SS guards with loaded guns, we were made to run from the station past electrically charged barbed wire through the camp for the cleansing station. For those of us who had passed the first selection, this was a real bath. Again, our illusion of reprieve found confirmation. The SS men seemed almost charming soon as we found out their reason. They were nice to us as long as they saw watches on our wrist and could persuade us in well meaning tones to hand them over. Would we not have to hand over all our possessions anyway? And why should not that relatively nice person have the watch? Maybe one day he would do one a good turn. We waited in a shed which seemed to be the anteroom okay, to the disinfecting chamber. SS men appeared and spread out blankets into which we had to throw all our possessions, all our watches and jewelry. There were still naive prisoners among us who asked, to the amusement of the more seasoned ones, who were these. They, okay, there are there as helper. If they could not keep a wedding ring, a medal, or a good luck piece, no one could yet grasp the fact that everything would be taken away. I tried to take one of the old prisoners into my confidence, approaching him furtively. I pointed to the roll of a paper in the inner pocket of my coat and said, "Look, this is the manuscript of a scientific book. I know that what you will say, that I should be grateful to escape with my life. That should be all I can expect of fate. But I cannot help myself. I must keep this manuscript at all cost. It contains my works, my life's work. Do you understand that?" Yes, he was beginning to understand. A grin spread slowly over his face, first piteous, then more amused, mocking, insulting, until he bellowed one word at me in answer to my question, a word that was ever present in the vocabulary of the camp inmates: shit. At that moment, I saw the plain truth and did what marked the culminating point of the first phase of my psychological reaction. I struck out my whole former life. Alright, so shall I just complete this page? Suddenly, there was a stir among my fellow travelers who had been standing about with pale, frightened faces, helplessly debating. Again, we heard the hoarsely shouted commands. We were driven with blows into the immediate antroom of the bath. They were assembled around an SS man who waited until we had all arrived. Then he said, I will give you 2 minutes and I shall give you by my watch. In these 2 minutes, you'll get fully undressed and drop everything on the floor where you are standing. You'll take nothing with you except your shoes, your belt or suspenders, and possibly a truss. I am starting to count now. With unthinkable haste, people tore off their clothes. As the time grew shorter, they became increasingly nervous and pulled clumsily at their underwear, belts, and shoelaces. Then we heard the first sound of whipping, leather straps beating down on naked bodies. Next, we were herded into another room to be shaved. Not only our heads were shown, but not a hair was left in our entire bodies. Then, on the showers, when we lined up again, we hardly recognized each other. But with great relief, some people noted that real water dripped from the sprays. While we were waiting for the shower, our nakedness was brought home to us. We really had nothing now except our bare bodies, even minus hair. All we possessed literally was our naked existence. What else remained for us as made material link with our former lives? For me, there were my glasses and my belt. The latter I had to exchange later on for a piece of bread. There was an extra bit of excitement in store for the owners of trusses. In the evening, the senior prisoner in charge of our hut welcomed us with a speech in which he gave us his word of honor that he would hang personally from that beam. He pointed to it. Any person who had sewn money on precious stones into his truss, proudly he explained that as a senior inhabitant, the camp laws entitled him to do so. Where our shoes were concerned, matters were not so simple. Although we were supposed to keep them, those who had fairly decent pairs had to give them up after all and were given in exchange shoes that did not fit. In for real trouble were those prisoners who had followed the apparently well meant advice given in the afternoon of the senior prisoners and had shortened their check boots by cutting the top off, then smearing soap on the cut edges to hide the sabotage. The SS men seemed to have waited for just that. All suspected of this crime had to go into a small adjoining room. After a time, we again heard the lashings of the strap and the screams of tortured men. This time it lasted for quite a while. Thus, the illusions some of us still held were destroyed one by one. And then, quite unexpectedly, most of us were overcome by a grim sense of humor. We knew that we had nothing to lose except our so ridiculously naked lives. When the showers started to run, we all tried very hard to make fun both about ourselves and about each other. After all, real water did flow from the sprays. कितना अपने आप में सोचने वाली बात है ना, वो इसी बात से खुश थे कि शावर में से पानी आ रहा है, गैस नहीं आ रहा है, वो मर नहीं रहा है, इसी बात से वो खुश थे. Apart from that strange kind of humor, another sensation seized us curiosity. I have experienced this kind of curiosity before as a fundamental reaction towards certain strange circumstances. When my life was endangered by a climbing accident, I felt only one sensation at the critical moment curiosity. Curiosity as to whether I should come out of it alive or with a fractured skull or some other injuries. Cold curiosity predominated even in Auschwitz, somehow detaching the mind from its surroundings, which came to be regarded with a kind of objectivity. At that time, one cultivated this state of mind as a means of protection. We were anxious to know what could what would happen next, and what would be the consequence. For example, of our standing in the open air in the chill of late autumn, stark naked and still wet from the showers. In the next few days, our curiosity evolved into surprise. Surprise that we did not catch cold. There were many similar surprises in store for new arrivals. These medical men among us learned first of all, textbooks tell lies. Somewhere it is said that man cannot exist without sleep for more than a stated number of hours. Quite wrong. I had been convinced that there were certain things I just could not do. I could not sleep without this, or I could not live without with that or the other. The first night in Auschwitz, we slept in beds which were constructed in tiers, one each tier, measuring about 6.5 to 8 feet. Slept 9 men directly on the boards. Two blankets were shared by each 9 men. We could, of course, lie only on our sides, crowded and huddled against each other, which had some advantages because of the bitter cold. Though it was forbidden to take soaps up to the bunks, some people did use them secretly as pillows in spite of the fact that they were caked with mud. Otherwise, one's head had to rest on the crook of an almost dislocated arm. And yet, sleep came and brought oblivion and relief from pain of few hours. I would like to mention a few similar surprises on how much we could endure. We were unable to clean our teeth, and yet, in spite of that and a severe vitamin deficiency, we had healthier gums than ever before. We had to wear the same shirts for half a year until they had lost all appearance of being shirts. For days we were unable to wash even partially because of frozen water pipes, and yet the shores and impressions on hands which were dirty from work in the soil did not suppurate. That is, unless there was frostbite, or for instance, a light sleeper who had to be disturbed by the slightest noise in the next room now find himself lying pressed against a comrade who snored loudly a few inches from his ear and yet slept quite soundly through the noise. If someone now asked of us the truth of Dostoevsky's statement that flatly defines men as being who can get used to anything, we could reply yes, a man can get used to anything. But do not ask us how. But our psychological investigations have not taken us that far yet. Neither had we prisoners reached that point. We were still in the first phase of our psychological reactions. The thought of suicide was entertained by nearly everyone, if only for a brief time. It was born for the hopelessness of the situation, the constant danger of death looming over us daily and hourly, and the closeness of the death suffered by many of the others. From personal convictions, which will be mentioned later, I made myself a promise on my first evening in camp that I would not run into wire. This was a phrase used in camp to describe the most popular method of suicide touching the electrically charged barbed wire fence. So author was so firm that he will not commit suicide in any sense. All right, it's been more than 1 hour, so let's keep it till here. We are at page number 25 out of 148 of this book. तो हम पेज नंबर 25 पे हैं आउट ऑफ 148. विल कवर दिस इन द नेक्स्ट लाइव स्ट्रीम. हम पढ़ रहे हैं मैन सर्च फॉर मीनिंग बाय फ्रैंकल एंड whoever ही इज़ हेयर. अगर आपका बुक रीडिंग में, नई पर्सपेक्टिव में या फिर बाकी चीज़ों में इंटरेस्ट है, लॉजिक में अगर इंटरेस्ट है, तो आप चेकआउट कर सकते हो चैनल को और सब्सक्राइब भी कर सकते हो चैनल को. एंड थैंक यू सो मच फॉर बीइंग हियर. थैंक यू सो मच यूनिवर्स. थैंक यू सो मच राधारानी जी. हैव फन. पीस आउट.